So we've made quite a journey since we started on this reading of Savitri in, I think, August 2009. Now we're coming towards the end of Book 10. For quite some months now, we have been following Savitri in her journey as she follows the soul of Satyavan. At the beginning of Book 9, death removed Satyavan's soul from his body, a luminous being, and started to lead him away. And Savitri has been following since that time. And all the time, death has been trying to persuade her to turn back, to give up her hope to return to earth with living Satyavan. Every kind of threat and menace and argument he has used to try to make her turn back. But now we have come to the end of Book 10, Canto 4, and the latest thing that happened was that he challenged her, this figure of death challenged her, that if the mighty mother is with thee, show me her face, that I may worship her. That's on page 664. She doesn't reply to him, but we read the last couple of weeks, how a mighty transformation came on her. Her whole appearance changes. And Savitri herself does not speak, but the voice of the Supreme Mother speaks to death. That's what we read last week, no? And she told him, thou art my shadow and my instrument. And we read why death is necessary in the present state of humanity, the present state of earth evolution. And the last line we read was line 913. Live, death, a while. Be still my instrument. So she is not dismissing him completely. But I'm going to read on from there. One day, man too shall know thy fathomless heart of silence and the brooding peace of night and grave obedience to eternal law and the calm, inflexible pity in thy gaze. But now, O timeless mightiness, stand aside and leave the path of my incarnate force. Relieve the radiant God from thy black mask. Release the soul of the world called Satyavan, freed from thy clutch of pain and ignorance, that he may stand master of life and fate, man's representative in the house of God, the mate of wisdom and the spouse of light, the eternal bridegroom of the eternal bride. She spoke. Death, unconvinced, resisted still, although he knew, refusing still to know, although he saw, refusing still to see. Unshakable he stood, claiming his right. His spirit bowed, his will obeyed the law of its own nature, binding even on gods. The two opposed each other, face to face. His being like a huge fort of darkness towered. Around it, her light grew, an ocean's siege. A while the shade survived, defying heaven, assailing in front, oppressing from above, a concrete mass of conscious power. He bore the tyranny of her divine desire. A pressure of intolerable force weighed on his unbowed head and stubborn breast. Light, like a burning tongue, licked up his thoughts. Light was a luminous torture in his heart. Light coursed a splendid agony through his nerves. His darkness muttered, perishing in her blaze. Her mastering word commanded every limb and left no room for his enormous will that seemed pushed out into some helpless space and could no more re-enter, but left him void. He called to night, but she fell shuddering back. He called to hell, but sullenly it retired. He turned to the inconscient for support from which he was born, his vast sustaining self. It drew him back towards boundless vacancy, as if by himself to swallow up himself. He called to his strength, but it refused his call. His body was eaten by light, his spirit devoured. At last he knew defeat inevitable and left crumbling the shape that he had worn, abandoning hope to make man's soul his prey, and forced to be mortal the immortal spirit. Afar he fled, shunning her dreaded touch, and refuge took in the retreating night. I'm going to pause there. We start this side? Yes? Suresh?
One dead man who shall know by fatherless God of silence and the brooding face of and grill inflexible pity in their gaze.
Yes. This is quite a mysterious sentence. What is the mother saying? Perhaps she's saying that one day human beings too will understand your power, your deep heart, your heart that's so deep we can't measure the depths of it, your heart of silence, and that brooding peace of night which you are offering. And since in the Indian tradition this god of death is also the god of law, he's the god of universal law and justice, who keeps everything in their place, in its place. So that's what he represents: obedience to eternal law, grave obedience. It means not trivial, not laughing. There's something serious about it, steady. And the calm, inflexible pity in thy gaze. Earlier on, when Aurobindo described this figure of death, he mentioned this kind of compassion which is there in the gaze of death. But at the same time, it is inflexible. He's not going to change. He's not going to change his mind. When somebody is destined to go, then he will take him away. But the mother says, one day human beings too, they will know who you are and what you represent. Bella.
But now, O timeless mightiness, stand aside and leave the house of my incoming force. Release the radiant God from thy black mask. Release the soul of the world called Shraddhavan, freed from thy clutch of pain and ignorance, that he may stand master of life and fate, man's representative in the house of God, the maid of wisdom and the spouse of life, the eternal bridegroom of the eternal bride.
So this is the command which the Supreme Divine Mother is giving. She's praised him, she's hailed him, she's said, live still, be my instrument. But now, in this particular case, oh, timeless mightiness. Again, she's honoring him, no? But she says, stand aside. Leave the path of my incarnate force. This is Savitri. Savitri is the force of the Supreme Mother in a body, incarnate. And then there's this other line, 920, relieve the radiant God from thy black mask. She's saying, behind death, your mask of darkness and determination and insistence and all your negativity, there's a shining God. Why don't you take off that black mask and show the shining God who is behind? And then she tells him to release, to set free Satyavan, the soul of the world called Satyavan. That is what Satyavan symbolically represents. The soul of each of us, the soul of the world. Set him free. from your clutch of pain and ignorance. At the very beginning, in Sri Aurobindo's author's note, he said that that's what Satyavan is. He's the soul carrying the truth within it, but here in the material universe, the soul is held in the grip of ignorance and death. So now she's telling this soul, this Satyavan, you set him free from this grip of pain and ignorance, so that he can stand as the master, the Lord of life and fate, not in the grip of anything, but the ruler, as man's representative in the house of God, the representative of the whole human race, as the mate of wisdom, the husband or the partner of wisdom, the spouse that has the same meaning, the partner of light, the eternal bridegroom of the eternal bride. She's commanding death to free Satyavan. No, but we can say that our mortal condition, our human condition of being subject to death, is due to our ignorance. If we were fully aware, if we had the true knowledge of who we really are, like Savitri, we would know that we are immortal. So in a way, the ignorance is connected with the death.
So I have to read like die clutch of pain and die ignorant.
Yes, yes. Or what it is your clutch of death is a clutch not only of pain, but also of ignorance. Yes. Ganga Lakshmi, would you read, please?
Yes. She spoke. That inconvenience exists still, although he knew refusing still to know, although he saw refusing still to see. Unshakable, he stood climbing with the light.
Yes. So the mother has finished speaking, but death is not obeying immediately. He's unconvinced. He doesn't accept what she says. And he's still resisting. He's refusing to know. He can't help knowing. He can't help hearing her words, but refusing still to know. This is typical of the negativity that Sri Aurobindo has shown in him. No? He saw, he sees, he's asked to see the face of the Mighty Mother. Now he can see her, but he's refusing to see. He's unshakable. He's not moving at all. He stood claiming his right to go on existing. Would you read, please, sir?
His spirit bowed, his will obeyed the law of its own nature, binding even on God's. The two opposed each other face to face, his being like a huge fort of darkness tower. Around it a light grew and oceans seas.
Thank you. So his spirit bowed. It can't help bowing to the mother. But he's still got his will. And Sri Aurobindo makes a very interesting point here, that every created being, every manifested being has their own nature, and everyone has to follow their own nature. And that's true even of cosmic powers, gods like this power of death. So his will goes on obeying the law of his nature, because the law of our nature is binding on all of us, even on gods. So the two, he representing the eternal no, she representing the eternal yes, they stood opposing each other, standing face to face, resisting each other. And his being, he's so huge, like a huge fortress of darkness, towers higher and higher. But she spreads her light, which becomes like an ocean, a powerful ocean, besieging, attacking that fortress. Sarojini.
While she said, survived,
Defying
heaven,
assailing
sailing in front of oppressing from above, a concrete mass of conscious power. He borrowed the training of her divine desire.
Thank you. So the shade is this dark, shadowy figure of death. For some time it survives, it remains. It's defying the light of heaven. But he has to bear the attack of the mother's force. It's attacking him in front, it's pressing down on him from above. It's a concrete mass of conscious power, the mother's force. He has to bear that tyranny, the despotic rule of her divine desire, her will, what she wants. So the description of that force continues. You would read, please, sir.
The placer of intolerable force, weighed on his unbowed head and stubborn breast. Light, like a burning tongue, lit up his thoughts. Light was a luminous touch in his heart. Light coursed a splendid agony through his nerves. His darkness muttered caressing in a place.
Thank you. Yes. So it's pressing from above, a pressure of intolerable force. It's so difficult to bear. No? It's weighing on his head, but he still doesn't bow his head. His head is unbowed. He keeps it upright. And his stubborn breast, his being, his heart, refuses to yield. But then her light starts to lick up his thoughts, his dark thoughts. And it's burning, it's so intense and powerful. Her light comes into his heart. It's luminous, of course, it's pure light, divine light. But to him it's a torture, it's so painful, unbearable. It courses, it runs through all the nerves. A splendid agony. It's that splendid, glorious light. But to him it's an agony, it's so painful, unbearable. So his darkness muttered, it's groaning and complaining as the darkness gets consumed by that blazing, glorious light of the Mother. Would you read today? Yes, please read. Yes.
Mastering work commanded every limb, and left no room for his enormous will that seemed pushed out into some helpless space and could no more re-enter deep left him void.
Yes. So her word of command, it's actually even the creative word. She's the power of the truth word. No? It is so mastering, it powerful. It controls every limb of his being. These are our limbs, no? Every part. So there's no room for his will. There was no room for his enormous will. That seems to be pushed out of the body into some helpless space outside him, and that strength can't come back anymore. He leaves him empty. He has no more willpower. So he calls for help. Lady at the back, will you read? Yes?
He called to Night, but she fell shuddering back. He called to Hell, but solemnly it returned. He returned to the inconscient for support, from which he was born. His was sustaining self. It drew him back to those boundless weapons, as if by himself to swallow at himself. He called to his strength, but he refused his call. His body was eaten by life. His spirit
devoured. It means eaten. A lion devours its prey. Yes. So he calls for help when his will and his strength has all left him, and there's this intolerable pressure of the Mother's will upon him. He called to night, to his power of darkness. But she's afraid. She fell shuddering back, shuddering with fear. She doesn't want to help him. She doesn't want to face that light. He called to hell, to the power of falsehood and evil. But it too draws back, retires, runs away, sullenly, in a bad temper. He turned to the inconscient for support, from which he was born. It seems that this dark figure can only exist. It has emerged from the inconscient, the level of total unconsciousness. That is where his vast, sustaining self has come from. This huge support for his existence. But it draws him back into him itself, towards some boundless vacancy. Boundless, there's no limit to it. Vacancy, emptiness. As if to swallow him up by himself. That emptiness. He has all the time been praising the void. But now it's as if he himself will be swallowed up by that emptiness. He called to its strength, but it refused his call. It doesn't respond to him. His body, his form is just eaten up by light, and even his spirit is devoured. It gets eaten up.
This boundless vacancy.
Yes.
Is it the power of the Divine Mother?
No, I don't think so. It's the power of the inconscient. And it's actually the power that he has been relying on, this boundless vacancy. The mother's power is much more positive than that. Yes, please.
At last he moved into each heaven and let go with the shape that he had borne, abandoning hope to make man's soul his prey, and forced to be mortal the immortal spirit. After he had shining her dreaded touch, and refuge took in the retreating night.
Yes. So at last he knows that he cannot win. He knows that defeat is inevitable, unavoidable. So he leaves this shape that he has been wearing, and it crumbles up, disintegrates, the shape that he's been wearing. He himself told Savitri that it's only an appearance. Because you wanted to confront me, I have put on this shape and this voice. So now he's abandoning it. And he's also abandoning his hope to make man's soul his prey. You know this word prey, Suresh, you know? Yes? There are the birds of prey, or the lion eats its prey. So what he wants to do, this force of death, of negativity, wants to eat up even the soul, not only the body, but the soul of human beings. He wants to force the immortal spirit that is in each one of us to be mortal, to be subject to death. That's what he's been trying to do. He's been denying to Savitri the reality of the soul. So he has to give up this big attempt that he has made, to confront Savitri and to force the immortal spirit to accept mortality. So he runs away. He fled. He ran away, far away from that touch of the mother, that pressure. He dreads that pressure of her touch. So he shuns it, he runs away from it. And where can he go? Only into that darkness of the night, which itself is running away, retreating. Dr. Palani.
In the dreams delight of that single world, the dire universal shadow disappeared, vanishing into the void from which it came, as if deprived of its original power. The delight learned fast fading from the soul, and Shraddhavan and Savitri were alone.
Yes. So death has been leading Savitri through this series of symbol worlds. The world of eternal night, and then the world of double twilight. The twilight of the ideal and the twilight of the earthly real. So that's where this last confrontation has been taking place. In the dream twilight of the earthly real. So when that terrible shadow of death disappears, this universal shadow, when he disappears, then that symbol world also disappears. The shadow disappears into the vacancy, the emptiness from which it came, And then that world which seems to be deprived, to have taken away its reason for existing, that also passed away, fading from their souls. Shraddhavan and Savitri were alone. Alone in some emptiness. Gomsun.
But neither stirred. Between those figures rose a beauty invisible and translucent world. In the long, blank, moonless pose, nothing could move. All wait on the unknown, inscrutable way.
Yes, inscrutable, right, yes. So there are Savitri and Shraddhavan. They are released from that dark shadow. They are released from that dream world that he had projected on them. But neither of them moves. And between them, it's as if there's an invisible barrier. It's silent, it's mute, it's invisible, it's translucent. Light passes through it. But it's there, a separation. And then there's a long moment's pause. Nothing could move. Everything is waiting to find out what is the unknown, inscrutable will, the will of a higher power. What is going to come next? Inscrutable. It's a word that means that we can't read it. It's often used of the expression on somebody's face. Somebody wears an inscrutable expression. You can't guess what they are thinking or feeling. But in this case, it's the will. What will happen now? For long moments, pause. So that is the end of Book 10.
Shraddhavan, I have one question. You remember when Aurobindo wrote this Book 10?
Yes, it was quite late in the late 1940s. Yes. And Nirod Baran, in his book, 12 Years with Sri Aurobindo, there's a chapter on Savitri. There he's described that when Sri Aurobindo was writing Book 10 and Book 11, the work went very fast. That he had it all, when Nirod came for the dictation, Sri Aurobindo had it all prepared in his mind, and he just went on dictating line after line after line after line for these two books, books 11 and 10 and 11.
10 years, 1914, 1915.
Yes, actually they didn't start on, there are 3 parts in the poem. The first part is books 1, 2 and 3. That is the quest of Aswapati. And that's if we think of time that Sri Aurobindo spent on the poem, he spent most of his time on part 1. And it was only really completed, more or less in this form, by 1944. And only after that he took up part 2. And part 2 is book 4, which tells about the birth and childhood and youth of Savitri and her going out on her quest. Book 5, the book of love. Book 6, the book of fate, when she comes back and tells her parents she's met Shraddhavan, and Narad is there and he gives his prophecy. And then book 7 the book of Savitri's Yoga. That was written in 1946, the book of Yoga. And then he started on book 8, he hardly touched, books 9, 10, and 11. So we have a fairly clear idea about the chronology.
1946 is the book of Yoga.
Yes. 7 cantos of the book of Yoga. And that's a completely new element in the poem that was not there in the original plan. There are 2 parts that somehow got added in the course of composition. We have this earliest version from 1916, which covers the whole course of the poem in the same order. But these 2 big additions have been made. One is the book 2, the book of the Traveller of the Worlds. This has come in the late 1930s. And then, of course, it got revised later. There was a break for about 2 years when Aurobindo didn't work on Savitri. When he took it up again in 1942, then he started revising all that first part again, and as I said, it was more or less finished by 1944. Then he took up the later books, and he was going back and revising them. We know that he was revising book 6 in 1950. In the middle of November, he completed that revision of book 6. And then he asked Nirod Bhavan what is left. And Nirod Bhavan said the Book of Death, book 8, and the epilogue. And Sri Aurobindo said that'll be for later on. So we have book 8, the Book of Death, is in almost the same form as it was in 1916. Just 18 lines have been added. And the epilogue, he must have worked on it sometime in the 20s, and he didn't go back and revise that. So if we look at what Sri Aurobindo has written, we could say at the very height of his poetic powers and inspiration, that would be book 1, and then these later ones, book 10 and 11. And of course, the book of Yoga, book 7. So now we have a new adventure to face us. Next week we will start on the book of Everlasting Day, which is perhaps one of the most difficult books to understand. But we can go back to page 666. We can read from lines 913, the mother's speech.
One day man too shall know thy fathomless heart of silence and the brooding peace of night and grave obedience to eternal law and the calm, inflexible pity in thy gaze. But now, O timeless mightiness, stand aside and leave the path of my incarnate force. Relieve the radiant God from thy black mask. Release the soul of the world called Satyavan, freed from thy clutch of pain and ignorance, that he may stand master of life and fate, man's representative in the house of God, the mate of wisdom and the spouse of light, the eternal bridegroom of the eternal bride. She spoke. Death, unconvinced, resisted still. Although he knew, refusing still to know. Although he saw, refusing still to see. Unshakable he stood, claiming his right. His spirit bowed. His will obeyed the law of its own nature, binding even on gods. The two opposed each other face to face. His being, like a huge fort of darkness, towered. Around it her light grew, an ocean siege. A while the shade survived, defying heaven, assailing in front, oppressing from above, a concrete mass of conscious power. He bore the tyranny of her divine desire. A pressure of intolerable force weighed on his unbowed head and stubborn breast. Light, like a burning tongue, licked up his thoughts. Light was a luminous torture in his heart. Light coursed a splendid agony through his nerves. His darkness muttered, perishing in her blaze. Her mastering word commanded every limb and left no room for his enormous will that seemed pushed out into some helpless space and could no more re-enter, but left him void. He called to night, but she fell shuddering back. He called to hell, but sullenly it retired. He turned to the inconscient for support, from which he was born, his vast sustaining self. It drew him back towards boundless vacancy, as if by himself to swallow up himself. He called to his strength, but it refused his call. His body was eaten by light, his spirit devoured. At last he knew defeat inevitable, and left crumbling the shape that he had worn, abandoning hope to make man's soul his prey and forced to be mortal, the immortal spirit. Afar he fled, shunning her dreaded touch, and refuge took in the retreating night. In the dream twilight of that symbol world, the dire universal shadow disappeared, vanishing into the void from which it came. As if deprived of its original course, the twilight realm passed, fading from their souls, and Shraddhavan and Savitri were alone. But neither stirred. Between those figures rose a mute, invisible, and translucent wall. In the long, blank moment's pause, nothing could move. All waited on the unknown, inscrutable will.